One. Welcome to a very exciting episode of the NeuFit Undercurrent podcast. I am joined today by Brian Gallagher, physical therapist extraordinaire. And Brian has a really interesting story that we'll dive into a little bit here today. He is a physical therapist and a former private practice owner. He built a hugely successful practice. He won National Practice of the Year awards. He sold his clinic for multi-seven figures, had a lot of success. Before that, he actually worked in staffing, so he has a really unique perspective on healthcare hiring and recruiting. And today, we're talking to him in large part because of not only that experience, but the recent work he's been doing as the founder and CEO of MEG Business. MEG is an acronym, Management Expansion Group, and they are actively training hundreds of physical therapy clinics, private practice clinics, on leadership, marketing, operations, hiring, compliance, and other aspects of running a PT business. Plus, he also has compliance and billing services that we use at our own physical therapy clinic here in Austin, Texas. So we can tell you from experience that we've loved working with Brian. He also hosts the Secrets of the Top 10% podcast, and we just recently did an episode on there. I loved our conversation, and that's this podcast describes exactly what Brian does. He helps practices get into the top 10% of physical therapy practices. And Brian, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Garrett. Thank you for that introduction. I've been looking forward to getting on this podcast. This is great stuff.
Awesome. So you work with physical therapy practices across a really wide area because you have some really depth and breadth, really expansive knowledge in a lot of areas. What are some of the biggest things that you work with practices on? Some of the biggest challenges and the biggest areas where with your current coaching and consulting offerings, you're able to help move the needle the most?
I'd have to say personnel. I think anybody who's in any business at all, I don't know if you're Coca-Cola or lemonade stand or physical therapy, the number one challenge that we all face from time to time is managing personnel, right? We believe that there's a sequential approach to success in any business. As long as you have three or more people assembled for a common purpose, common goal, you have an organization, you have a company. And so many of us as physical therapists go into practice as PTs who happen to own a business. And I'm constantly trying to reverse that flow and be like, no, you're a CEO practice owner who happens to be a PT. So I would say the number one challenge, whether it's big or small, and I've worked with, clients that had over 400 offices. I've worked with clients that are just starting up and just getting their funds and everything in between. It's how do I create a company culture whereby the people who assemble around me are contributing to the best of their ability to the overall goals, products, successful actions of why we created this company to begin with. That's the challenge, really.
Awesome. I love that. And that, I think, speaks to the very fundamental question of being able to scale. If you're a physical therapist, if you can treat, one person at a time, how do you then expand that impact and reach more people? Right. Obviously, you need to partner up and hire people and work together to reach more people, and that's great. So, what are some of the strategies or tactics in that realm that have really helped people build a team, effectively hire, recruit, lead, and maintain positive working relationships with their staff and other people they hire?
That's a great question. And that can go in two directions, right? I mean, we can get into the logistics and the mechanics of what does it take to run a successful private practice with the history and experience we've had, or we can talk about the beingness of it, right? Like, where do you have to mentally be as a person to be both an entrepreneur and an executive and a manager, right? So the entrepreneur executive, I kind of put that together. That's leadership, making the footprints in the sand where nobody else has been yet. You've lived that life, Garrett. You've been extremely successful with what you've done with the Neubie. You saw an opportunity to provide a better service and a better product, and you put everything into it over a decade of your life. And as a result, now people are benefiting from that. But nobody did that before you. Nobody had to, you had to do that. That's a beingness. You see, the mechanics, I'll let you answer. I'm sure you learned a lot of things along the way that you wish you had known before you dove in, but we just don't have that luxury when you're an entrepreneur. You're doing it for the first time. Was that not your experience running into things that you're like, Didn't know I needed to know that.
Yeah, absolutely. I can totally relate to that. You talk about having to create that mindset shift for PTs to
Yeah.
start to identify as CEOs and business leaders. And that was a big identity shift for me. I was an engineer, neuroscientist, got into clinical work with various clinicians I was working with here in Austin. And um, I was so identified with that I've had to learn business by necessity in order to do that, to be able to scale and reach more people. And it's like a fundamental identity shift that
Yes.
it takes some work.
It does take some work. And so a lot of PTs, if we go back to that, we graduate high school, maybe we've been in sports, maybe we've been really intrigued in medicine, but we don't want to be a doctor who's just going to do three things: cut you open, give you drugs, or send you for a test. Many people look at that and say, I don't want to do that. So they want to work with people and change their life and have them live optimum health. And they throw themselves into physical therapy. They spend $150,000 to get a $75,000, $80,000 a year job. And that's all fine and good because you're just hands-on working with people, changing their lives. You're really physically engaged. It's such an engaging profession. I really, really loved a profession of physical therapy. And then someday you hang your shingle and you say, I'm going to run my own practice. I'm going to have my own business. And what you fail to realize is being the best PT, being the best player on the field doesn't mean you're going to be the best team coach. Doesn't mean you're going to cultivate the best camaraderie, the best abilities of those around you. And that needs to be taught. That's not inherent to people. You need to learn how to instill in people how to flourish and prosper as a person and a being and as a professional. I would say my number one most successful action of disseminated advice is to get my owners or people looking to be owners to comprehend the idea that you're embarking on a new profession. You're embarking on a new chapter of your life as a CEO and owner. You're now invested in seeing that those closest to you are flourishing and prospering both personally and professionally. And that's what will build you a culture, because transparency breeds trust. And if you can role model and you can be transparent with those around you, they're going to follow you anywhere, and they're going to want to be a part of your game because you're protecting their interests as well as your own.
I love that. I think that, gosh, there's a lot there in terms of how to do that, and a few things come to mind for me, and I'd be curious to kind of compare notes here. So I totally agree with you. We want that transparency. We want people to buy in. One of my friends and mentors has a quote that says, "People, people working on your team, people will do what you ask them to do, but they will passionately put their heart into what they help co-create." So
Yeah.
for us, I've found that doing team-wide strategic planning is very helpful because people have a say in the direction of the business. Obviously, we as leaders ultimately have the final say, but if we can create that environment where we're getting input from people, especially the people who are closest to various problems and situations, and have greater insights in how to handle them, if they can help create that plan, and then for us doing some profit sharing and sharing numbers with some high degree of transparency there. I feel like those two things have probably been the most impactful for us in terms of creating that sense of transparency, camaraderie, buy-in. Um, there's probably others upon reflection, but what would you say? Are there other things that you in your practice or that you're coaching other practice owners to do? Things like that. Other different activities that they're doing that really help to create that culture that you're looking for.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. We've been going off site now for about 16 years annually to do our annual business strategic planning for our companies. And we've been doing that for, like I said, 16 years, if not longer. And when you include everybody in your team, your upper team, to be a participant in the authorship of where we're going to be next year, what are we going to look like 12 months from now? Well, they take a little ownership of that. They're wearing that, they're folding those clothes alongside you, right? They're not just waiting for the laundry to come out and for you to tell them what to wear today. They're actually participating in the whole ensemble of the wardrobe. And that's kind of how I see building businesses. Because what do we have to really challenge ourselves with? We have to challenge ourselves with the ability to scale and then expand, and then scale and then expand. And so you have to scale within your 1,800 square foot office, and then you want to expand in that second location, or you want to, branch out, and maybe you want to have a completely different practice, like a cash-based practice, completely separate from your insurance-based practice. There's so many different things you can do. Or like in my case, I started as a staffing company, built that up to about 160 employees, and had, I don't know, 55, 65 contracts where I sent people all over the state of Maryland. But I also had 5, 6 clinics where people were coming to work each and every day. So I think back, like, why did I do that? Like, why did I go? Because that's what my people wanted. People wanted just to go to a fixed place to work, and other people wanted the freedom to work 6 or 7 or 8 visits a day and go all over town and stop and eat lunch wherever they wanted. So I afforded them the opportunity to have that flexibility. And I think that's our job. That is our job, is to identify, like, who's our public, who's our market. It's not enough just to have a great patient care experience if you can't have a great company culture, if you can't have one where people are fully vested in the participation of the success of your practice. And like you said, you talked about profit sharing, monetarily rewarding people for their products, their ability to produce product. I always tell people, look, I don't care if my front desk staff member runs a crystal on her head all day, as long as she's getting the product of all patients arriving as scheduled on time throughout their entire duration of care, and all monies due over the counter collected. Those are the 2 products. Now, there's a whole bunch of doingnesses that you need to do to achieve that, but I could break that down for every single solitary position in a PT practice. And so should you. So should every practice owner know that they can tap that employee on the shoulder and say, what is your product? Because your product and your ability to get your product is actually what your pay is for. I am not interested in paying people time for money. If somebody in my employment says, oh my gosh, I got to get to work, I got to get my hours, I'm like, I don't want you working for me to get your hours. That is not what you're here for.
I like that. I like that. It's about the results and what you do with that time. Some really good insights there. Really good insights. So you mentioned far and away, or number one issue is personnel. Are there any in terms of physical therapy clinics, most challenging aspects of being a practice owner? Are there any other close seconds or other issues that really tend to pop up anywhere near as frequently?
Yeah, I think it's the stuff that we bury down inside of ourselves and we don't really want to admit. And some of that comes up in my world. What I see most often is financial, right? A lot of us went into physical therapy because we're very social characters, we're very dynamic, but we don't know a spreadsheet, a balance sheet from a P&L in the beginning, right? Income and expense reports, cash flow reports, pro formas, Gantt chart. I use the word Gantt chart, and every physical therapist doesn't even know what I'm talking about. And so we have to face the fact that we went through high school, went to PT school, and there's this whole other arena of knowledge that we need to have to be successful in being an entrepreneur and PT owner. And we have to go buy it. We have to go buy it. We have to invest in it. I didn't get it. Man, if I could rewind the hands of time back to 2000 and, well, let's see, I started my business in 1997, opened my first clinic in 1999. So I'm dating myself, but boy, what I had to learn along the way, just like you, if I could have invested in that education first and then gone into it, it's just like PT school. You go to PT school first, be a student and apprentice it first, and then you go and get your first job, and then you treat your caseload, right? But so often we get into ownership and we're just bumping along, learning as we go. And it's what we don't know that's holding us back. So I would say the second biggest challenge, second to managing staff, is really introspectively admitting to yourself that there is a good percentage of this endeavor that you're embarking on as a PT owner that you're not equipped with. You had no background and you have no mentorship in, and you're just going to try to read books and watch some YouTube videos. It's not going to work. You really need to spend some time and money on refining yourself as a CEO, a finance director, a recruiting officer, a PR director, a personnel manager, a marketing director, and the list goes on.
Yeah, absolutely. I can totally relate to that. I think that hits the nail on the head, or hits the bullseye there in terms of dealing with people, effectively leading and managing the team, and then upgrading our skills, finding out where what we don't know, and
Yeah,
then either learning it or hiring for it.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Both
that's
of
really good.
those are equally equipped answers. There's certain things that I'm just not really great at. And so I bring people closest to me who are really good at it, and they complement. I'd rather spend, if I only had 3 hours to spend on myself, I would rather spend 2 of the 3 hours on my strengths and 1 of the 3 hours on my weaknesses. I'm going to get much greater return on my investment by enhancing and building my strengths than I ever will by refining my weaknesses.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very, very wise advice there. When you work with both, I mean, you mentioned, startup practices and practices that have dozens or hundreds of locations.
Yeah, hundreds.
What
Yeah.
what are some of the biggest differences, or I mean, it sounds like in some respects people may have grown businesses but still need to step back and learn and almost adopt a startup, beginner's mindset, which I think is helpful in a lot of areas of life. But what are some of the biggest, um, I guess we'll say, differences in terms of your work with startups versus existing practices?
Uh, Boy, that's a great question. Um, do you do any boating, Garrett? Do you like doing any water sports at all?
I have a couple friends who have boats, and I enjoy going going on their boats.
Here's my analogy. I have a Mastercraft X30. It's a 23-foot boat. It's an inline boat. It's a beast. I mean, I can wake surf. I can regular surf, wakeboard, knee board, anything you want to do behind this boat. It is just such a model boat of everything, and it's so nimble and it's so quick, and we can do all this stuff. But it's so strong. I can pull tubers, multiple tubers. It's just such a fun, and it can adjust to any climate. And then so you get the mental picture of that, right? It's like you load it up for whatever activity you're going to run into that day, and that thing's just going to bip, 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 and do it. And then picture yourself on an aircraft carrier. It's going to go straight really well, but it's not going to be dodging and ducking, and it's not going to be adjusting and compensating. That's my franchise, big corporate type owners, right? Not the franchise necessarily, because they can be one-off, and then they just participate to get that background support, right? But these corporate models, I had a owner who came with 86 offices, and I helped him go to 114 within 2 years. And so, but it was difficult because it was like trying to change course of a aircraft carrier stuff, because people get into what I call fixed ideas, and they repeat back to me, well, that's the way we've always done it, Brian. Well, that's the way it's always been done. Well, that's the way business is done outside, and they get so stuck on these things. And I try to say to them, your biggest challenge when you're a big provider, 50 offices, 30, 40, 80, 100, 400, like the one I had, your biggest challenge is culture. Your biggest challenge is trying to have standard operating procedures that are efficient and productive, while at the same time not creating a sterile white clinic that every single clinic operates like a McDonald's, and there is no variation, there is no culture, there is no character, there is just no uniqueness between them, because this is how we all do it. We all do it the same way. Meanwhile, they're in all different towns. Spokane is different than Chicago. Chicago is different than Jacksonville, Florida. Jacksonville is different than Austin, Texas. So I'm often telling my large clients, I will help you create what's called a cruise ship model. You should have a bunch of different islands with ports, and let them run their island in a very unique, characteristic way. If they want to wear football jersey Fridays, they're jersey Fridays. If another office wants to have jean Fridays, let them have jean Fridays. If one wants to do more social media marketing, another one's more direct marketing because it's better in that environment, then embrace that, encourage that, instill that uniqueness, that character for them. You will be able to have a huge network of clinics that are thriving because everyone's invested in their own individualism in it. They have their own self-determinism that you're allowing them to express. But when you get big, that seems to get confined and you get pushed down into this one, versus the smaller clinics. It's completely opposite. I have everything under my control. I can create every unique thing. And that's their little bit of the problem there. They go into things that aren't time tested. They're not proven. They're just bright ideas. And they just go into, I had somebody say, Brian, I think I got this really great marketing idea. I'm like, really, Jason, what do you think it'd be? Well, I think what we should do is we should put our advertisement inside fortune cookies at the local Chinese restaurant, and people are going to come and they're going to be all over the community. And I sat back, I said, you're joking, right? And they're like, no, we've been thinking about this a long time. I'm like, no, we're not doing that. No, that's not happening. And I was just like, what made you think of that? That is not a solution to a problem. But see, it's what you don't know when you're small startup, mom and pop, because 73% of all the I think there's about 36,000 private practices out there. 73% of them are onesie twosies. They have one location or two locations. So they can get really kind of out in the fray on what they think they should do. And in the last 18 months, I've helped 28 people do startup clinics. So I'm doing that quite frequently, and I'm trying to keep them on the secrets of the top 10%. There's a reason why it's the top 10%, because they've already figured that stuff out. Now you got to make the best of it on your world.
Yeah, that's awesome. Some really good insights there. I especially like when you're talking about the larger operations that can feel like aircraft carriers that are just so stuck going in that direction. And it just reminds me of a theme that ultimately, when no matter what business you're in, no matter whether you're talking to a customer or a potential customer, like at the end of the day, it's people who operate
Yes.
live within businesses, and um, we're dealing with people, and so kind of being human first, I think, and doing things that just feel good and speak to the humanity of each person there. And if you get into one of those environments where it's just dehumanizing because it's so much about being a robotic policy and procedure follower, that can feel
Yeah.
a little stifling there. So I think that's a great insight, and I like how you draw that distinction there. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And, I like on podcasts, if you don't mind, and you've been hinting to this in the way you've asked your questions, let's give your audience like let me back up. I think a lot of times I see podcasts done and people talk about the ideas, right? Like we've been covering, like we've been talking concepts and ideas, right? I like to dig down even deeper and let's give some tools. Let's give some successful actions. So to your point, which your questions have been fabulous. If I'm a small private practice owner and I'm watching this right now and say, okay, Brian, well, give me something. What do I do? Give me a doingness. Like, what would I do to achieve what you're asking me to do? Here's something you could do. It's called the 10-minute meeting. Okay. What you do is you meet with every single one of your employees for 10 minutes once a month, and it's their time. It's for them to talk to you about what's on their mind, what's going on in their head, what they're feeling at the moment. I don't care if they come in and they talk about their puppies I got two, Labradoodles and they're really cool. And I'm having a juggle going back from the clinic back home. And you just sit and listen and you just be present. Be there for your employee. Let them talk about, maybe they're going to talk about documentation. Maybe they're going to talk about innovation or technology or something they read or something they saw. Grant them their beingness, grant them their time, their altitude with you as the owner, for you to be the listener. It's not a time for you to in-service them or anything like that. It's just, and I'll tell you what, your company morale will just inch up almost immediately because they're feeling heard and they're feeling valued, right? So the 10-minute meeting, I think that's just such a super important thing. And then here's another mechanical thing you can do. It's called the two-way street. We have something called a status sheet. If I were to hire you, Garrett, and I said, Garrett, welcome aboard. You're 3 years out of school. You're our new staff therapist, and you just accepted an $80,000 a year position. On your status sheet, I'm not going to give you an employment letter because that can be construed as a contract. I would never recommend that. I give you this status sheet. It's an Excel kind of, broken out status sheet. And it says, Garrett, you're working at this office. These are your start and stop times. These are the benefits you selected. Here's your pay. Oh, here's the compensation for the benefit package you did select. So your pay is 80,000, but your benefits add up to 9,000. So really you accepted an $89,000 a year position. And then on the other side, I say, okay, so on one hand, this is what we're bringing to your home every 2 weeks for you working here. On the other hand, here's what our expectations of you: 85% clinically efficient, 3.75 units of care, because we want to give you see that you're giving an abundance of care with each patient. Quality care as measured by net promoter score, success stories, testimonials, outcome measures from our EMR system. You see what I'm saying? My point is, when people start off working for you and they get the two-way street, like, oh, okay, I accepted this position to get this pay, this benefits, this number of time off, blah, blah, blah. In exchange, I'm held accountable to deliver this, this, and this. And if those don't match up, there's going to be total justification for a meeting, for a sit down. I think people respond really, really well to that degree of transparency. So there's two mechanical things you can do as an employer that's really going to set the stage for a great company culture.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to what you talked earlier. Even the receptionist answering the phones, everyone has a product or everyone has a metric or everyone
Yep.
has some standard to which they're held accountable. And the more clear we can be about that, I think it not only, I mean, it not only protects the practice owner, but also protects the individual employee because
Yeah.
because they know what they're supposed to be doing. There's less ambiguity. They know the standard to which they're being held accountable. So it's not just some arbitrary like, oh, is my boss going to get mad at me because I haven't done what I'm supposed to do today. You know what the standards are. The more objective, the better. So I think that's great.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's shift gears a little bit. I'm gonna ask you to bring out your crystal ball. So, as someone who's very plugged in to the physical therapy industry, works with all these practices, speaks at state and national physical therapy conventions on a regular basis, what do you see as being the biggest challenges or opportunities coming down the pipeline in the next 5 years?
Okay, that's a great question. We can go in many different directions with that. I'll take it from this angle. I think there's three major challenges that we're all confronting, and we see it just about every single day. I think we have geopolitical challenges, and I think we are all pretty aware of what's going on in Ukraine and Taiwan, and you know our national government and our deficit and stuff like that. Now, I'm not one to get myself all wrapped up into stuff that I can't change. If it's something I can't do anything about, I don't get all emotionally entrenched in it. I need to be educationally aware of the impacts of those things. And so I think that's a challenge. And I think we all have to be somewhat mindful of what's going on that level. The second major challenge, I think, is societal. I think it's very evident that our society is shifting. There is never been a time where we've had so many people sitting on the sidelines of our labor market. The unemployment or the lack, the eligible employed number of people who are electing not to work has never been higher. And we have to confront that. We have to, like, what's going on with our society that that's the case? What is happening about the way people are coming out of school and dealing with that, right? So we have the general societal kind of shift, and then we have our actual workforce, our actual labor. Give a specific on that. For years and years and years, what was really attractive to people upon being interviewed, because I had a staffing company, so I averaged 7 interviews a week, every single week. And for the 90s and 2000s, for the most part, people want to know what their pay was going to be, what their benefits were going to be. Did you have a short-term, long-term disability plan? Did you have a 401k or retirement option for me? What was my longevity like? What did you have a ladder of promotion? Did you have opportunities for me to grow within this business so I could stay here longer and make more? Today, the average graduate from 24 to 34 years old will change jobs 4 times. Those things are not important to them. They don't care about the 401k. I mean, I'm being overgeneralist here, but a short-term disability, long-term disability, 401k, IRA, they don't care. They want to know, what can you do to enhance my quality of life today? What are you going to do to impact me today? And if you can't do it, I'll leave and work down the street for $1 different. We have to change that. We have to get people to understand that life is about giving more in value, giving more than you expect in return. And I feel like when you run an organization and you don't look for an even exchange, you don't look for a win-win. I hate win-win. I hate that concept. Oh, if you're winning, then I should be winning. What do you need? What can I do to enhance your quality of life while working? Because you're going to spend 1/3 of your life sleeping, 1/3 of your life doing recreation, friend things, and 1/3 of your life at work. And I believe that third at work, if done properly, fuels the other two so that you have a happy life. That's my job. That's where my mental attention goes. So barriers are the challenges of the new labor force, the challenges of a quickly shifting society, and these geopolitical things that I just never thought I'd hear people shouting about, nuclear wars or whatever. And I don't get wrapped up in it, but I do have to keep a little attention on it. So what can you do as a small-time private practice owner? create a safe space, create a solitude, create opportunities for people to want to never be anywhere else but with you, because you have a long-term plan. You have something for them to want to participate and stay with you and not keep jumping job to job and place to place. Believe me, it doesn't forward them spiritually or physically or emotionally, because it's constant start, change, stop, start, change, stop.
I think those are yeah. I think those are great insights. One thing that you mentioned that some people might be listening, especially if they haven't read the Go Giver book, which I know is one
Yes.
a book I loved and learned about from you. But for you to say that you don't like the concept of win-win, that on the face of it, some people might think, well, what do you mean? That seems like everybody wins. Like can you just share a little more why you say that concept is not for you?
I believe that concept forwards the mental attitude that I'm going to take my initial step forward in helping you win because I'm expecting something in return. I'm starting with my own self-preservation as my first forethought. I'm going to either artificially or manufacture, I was going to say Lee, but that's probably not a word. I'm going to manufacture some sort of a win scenario for you with the anticipation that I don't think like that. I think like, you know, how can I build the best team here? How can I create, the four keys to business success is create the ideal work environment, put in the optimal structure with standard operating procedures, bring the best personnel, and then invest in that personnel continuously every single month through a learning management system, continuing education, anything you can so that they're flourishing and prospering personally and professionally. And then last but not least, put in the ideal systems of operation. That's why I got all these journals right here. I've got two books there that I'm in the middle of, and I've got two audio books that I'm listening to at 1.5 to 2.0 speed because I talk to that speed. So I think with that speed. And why do I do that? Because I'm constantly looking, when you look at that systems of operation, where's the differentiator? Where's the market disruptor? Where is the thing that I'm going to put into my practice that's going to make us look like a zebra, not like all the other brown horses? And that's when I found the Neubie, the 4 or 5 years back when I met you. And I was like, this thing is fabulous. Like I've never, people are always introducing stuff to me. And I'm like, I even went into it like, yeah, okay, I'm sure there's nothing new under the sun, whatever. And then when I saw people working out while getting high intense stimulation, I'm like, whoa, what is that? And Jason Waz, my good friend, I'm like, can you hook me up? I want to see what that's like. I mean, I could barely break the range of motion. The muscles were pulling me back so hard, but I had to work against it. I was blown away because, again, being a therapist at that time, I was a therapist for like 26 years. I found something new under the sun. I was so reinvigorated because, after 26 years of doing something, you don't see a whole lot of innovative new stuff. That really got me excited. And now the rest is history. But that fell in my category of success, not under physical environment, not under structure, not under personnel. It fell in that systems of operation. All owners listening here, you have to have some mental attention units continuously expressed and expanding in innovative systems of operation. And it could be administrative. It could be a new EMR system too. I mean, that's just like virtual front desk, which is what we're trying to promote. That's new too, but if you don't put some mental attention units on that, that's why I mentioned the books and magazines and audio, then you're stagnant. You're literally just working. You're just working. You're just changing time for money.
Yeah, and ultimately, I think it's all about growth. So I'm so glad you bring that up. And our businesses, our family life can be a vehicle for growth, can be a catalyst for that growth. But ultimately, I think that's the thing that is more important than the P&L statement or
Yes.
So that's yeah, really cool to hear you say that.
And when you say growth, Gary, you mean growth like in one's sphere of influence, right? That's growth, right? You're influencing more people, you're expanding and helping more people, you have greater ability to help more people. That's growth, personal growth, intellectual growth, physical growth, I think of all of that when you say that.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I'm so glad you said that because there's aspects to it. It's not just
Mhm.
growth. It's well, there's growth mentally, physically, financially, spiritually, influentially, if that's a
Yeah.
word. Yeah,
Yes, absolutely.
yeah.
It's not just the P&L growing or the balance sheet growing or the bank account growing. That's one element.
Yeah, and that mindset, I think that's a really cool. If anyone listening has not heard that concept before, where Brian talked about how win-win is actually, may not necessarily be the winning strategy. I think that's an interesting mindset shift that just to try on, thinking, leading, how can I give, what can I provide, what value can I provide in excess of what I'm being paid, and then trusting that the rest is going to take care of itself because it usually does.
Well, if you have the right systems and you brought in the right person, it literally is such a natural transition to success. I know when I won practice of the year, I didn't know at the time, but after I won practice of the year, I was able to judge the next, 10 submittals, top 10 submittals for the next few years, because you become a judge. And that's when I laid them all out on the table and I started highlighting the common denominators. And that's what I saw. I saw this selflessness of the top tier of our profession of practice owners who were just killing it and just doing so well. And the common denominator I saw was selflessness, not selfishness. It wasn't what can you do for me? It was what could I possibly provide to you? And if I have the right person, we're going to do wonderful things together. It's that sharing, it's that inclusion.
Well, that's so good. I think we literally could stop the recording right there, but I do want to keep going while we have a wonderful resource, a wealth of knowledge here. But I mean, really, I hope that sinks in for everybody listening. Some really good wisdom there. Let's transition here to people who are thinking, you know, yes, that's great. I believe you, and I also want some more mechanics of the business. And let's shift over into the revenue side. So, can you share your thoughts on overall on the topic of cash versus insurance? And if you're helping a practice owner draw up a strategy, what's your framework for deciding? Are there any target ratios of percentage cash versus insurance? What are the framework, the questions you ask? How do you approach that topic?
Excellent. So let's get into some more mechanics. Let's give some tokens of success here. I always call them on my podcast tips for professional success. So, tip number one for professional success. Let's say you're 28 years old, you graduated PT school when you're 24, you've been working in outpatient, and you kind of know some stuff now, right? You've been out 4 years, you've seen a lot of patients, you've seen what you like, you've seen what you didn't like, and now you're thinking, I want to embark upon opening up my own practice. And I've been watching these videos or podcasts about going all cash. The insurance industry is terrible. I'm going to do this. I can charge my own rates. Well, here's the thing. With everything, there's a heads and a tails of every coin, right? So the head side of that coin is, yes, you get paid at the time of service. You don't necessarily need a billing department. You can practice more liberally. You don't have to be confined to the rules and regulations of some of the insurance carriers and so on and so forth. The tails to that is typically 6 out of 10 people who call or find your office will be willing to come in and pay cash because they have insurance and they look at it like I'm paying for that insurance. And now I'm not going to be using it. I'm going to be spending it with you instead of using it. And so that's a little bit of a bugaboo for a lot of people. And then the second negative to an all cash practice is most, not all, because I've met some, I've stood corrected, but most all cash practices are successful at cash because people are willing to come see you. They're willing to come see you because you're the person that's worth spending $150 a session or $100 a session when you're the one that's worth me foregoing my insurance, right? So it's really hard for you to assemble a team of juniors underneath of you that are going to be carrying a schedule and carrying a caseload. So you can go off to Italy or you can go to Ireland or you can go out to the Grand Canyon and there's going to be a check there when you get back. Most of the time there's not. So an all cash clinic has its challenges. That's all. It's not the end of the world. If you want to go that way and you want to stay small and create a very nice paying job for yourself, I think all cash is really wonderful. What I would say though, to give you the greatest position with the greatest advantage, given what the purpose is of becoming a physical therapist. Like when I ask people, what are the two most popular reasons why we became a clinician? Well, number one, because I wanted to find a profession where I could help as many people in my community as possible. The more people I'm able to help, the more satisfying my position is. And number two, I want to be as skilled as possible to achieve as much optimal health in every patient I can, so I can literally leave it all on the field when I work with them. I don't want to shake and bake my patients and get them in and out in 30 minutes. I want to spend 55 to 65 minutes with each and every patient. I want to give them an abundance of care with each and every opportunity. I'm very blessed that they chose to see me when they have many, many other providers to choose from, but they're here with me. And that's how I think when you really ask a therapist, like, what are the two, not to help someone, because everybody, that's part of being human. I think we should all help each other. I think that's the reason why we're human. But to actually try to make a difference in your community and to actually try to have the skills and the knowledge to have an impact with each and every engagement, those are the two main reasons why you become a therapist. So if that in fact is the case, then doing a hybrid office to me is the golden situation. 20% of your total annual revenue should come from cash-based services, 80% from insurance-based services. Now you have the ability to provide both within one setting and one community, one demographic. To me, that's the best. And some people can grow in your practice on the insurance model side. And when their skills get high to the higher standard, you give them a certificate of approval, they can now start taking cash patients at a higher clip, per visit, right? Because they have that skill set that's going to demand that. To me, I think we need to look at our practice in that way, find certain pieces of equipment, certain delivery systems, whether it be dry needling or, laser or, Neubie, PMF. I mean, there's just so much new technology coming. You know better than I'm not one to, you're the innovator of that. But I think as therapists and as owners, we should be thinking with that, like, how can we still service our traditional insurance community because they need our help, and how can we make ourselves available to this really optimal health idea of cash-based services? I think that's the best way to play it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to look at it. So I appreciate that. And one thing that I'll add for us, so our practice in Austin, we were all cash for several years, and we were doing seven figures in top line revenue, so having good success. But we did start to accept on a limited basis some insurance, and one of the big reasons for doing that was post-op care, because people have already, and that's one very specific circumstance where people have already spent a lot of money, and so to come out of pocket more for 20
Right.
post-op visits or something like that, that could be cost prohibitive. And so wanting to help people in that regard was one of the motivating factors for us to start accepting some insurance. But I think, I mean, what you said there makes a ton of sense. I think that really captures the best way to look at it.
I think you're right. I'm so glad you said it like that, Garrett. I I'm a big fan of seeing Medicare patients. I think that's the part of our community that we're all going to end up in someday, if we live long enough. And for someone to be caring enough to stay in that system to help me, I think is a very enriching thing. I think there's certain insurance carriers that are willing to pay fairly for our services. Like you said, you picked a handful of them. I think there's some that are just abusive. I think there's some insurance carriers that, there was an insurance carrier that was paying $17 a session. I'm like, just on the face of it, that's an insult. Like, that is just a slap in the face to the profession. Nobody should accept $17 a visit. That is just absurd, right? So I've seen everything in between. I was just talking to a person in the Pacific Northwest who says her insurance company is paying on average $149 a visit. I'm like, well, it's not the national average right now. The national average is 81 to 83. That's almost double. She's like, oh yeah, I've got one carrier that pays us over $200 a visit. I said, how much? She goes, I can't tell you. I don't want to say. She goes, it's embarrassing. I'm like, you're so ashamed that you're making $200 a visit. You can't even tell me. But what's wrong with our healthcare system, Garrett? How could that be when you're in upstate New York making $58 a visit, but you're in the Pacific Northwest and you've got an insurance carrier that pays over $200 a visit? Those are the things that make me like want to stab myself with a butter knife. It's like, what are we doing? And your question is a good one. How do you combat that when you're in upstate New York? You need cash-based services. You need a fair amount of cash. And one of my owners up there, I think he has 7 Neubies or something like that, 5 or 6 Neubies. And he just created a whole wellness, fitness, just huge complement up there. And he did really well with that. At $58 a visit, you can't just be traditional. You have to go traditional.
Yes, good shout out to Jeremy at Maple City.
Yeah.
Got running a great business up there. I think a lot of people listening may just be pulling up Zillow to look at houses in Seattle or Washington State after hearing that. Um, does that, so just one quick follow-up question. You mentioned that your ideal ratio is going to be 20% cash, 80% insurance. Does that change based on the demographic of the area? If you have more people with out of network plans or, wealthier areas versus areas that may be more rural or less affluent or, any of those sorts of things?
Yeah, I think there's about 12 markets that I would pinpoint where this wouldn't apply. Cook County, Fairfax County, Orange County, California, Cook County, Illinois, Fairfax County, Maryland. There's certain pockets like that where, you know, Anne Arundel County, Maryland. Anne Arundel County, Maryland, the average household income is about $130,000 a year. I mean, that's just way above the national average, right? Of 73. So, you're in these different markets. Yeah. You're up in the Pacific, you said Seattle, and that's exactly right. You're up in that Seattle market, the home of Google, the home of Microsoft, yeah. I mean, I have a lot of cash owners up there that, $200 on the eval and 150 revisit. It's the market. So that's really good that you pointed out, because my statistics are more nationally average based, but there just are some of these pockets, but it's really about a dozen. After that, it kind of filters into this normal, level for everybody.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense. So let's talk about coaching. So can you describe, I think in the intro, I talked about the breadth. You're kind of coaching people throughout the customer journey from marketing and lead generation through operations, fulfillment, hiring, and recruiting. Can you talk about, what it's like to work with Meg Business and the breadth and scope of services that you're providing?
Absolutely. And, I don't want this to be like a solicitation or anything. It's just more of an informative, educational answer that I'd like to give. Back in the day when I had opened my second office and it was far too big and I just was far too green, and I hit the fan, I was 85,000 in debt and I was burning 5,000 a month. I was negative 5,000 a month. It was my wife who put her hands on my shoulders and she said, taking another Con Ed course isn't going to make this a better practice. And I was like blown away by that concept. She says, when are you going to realize it's what you don't know that's holding you back from success, right? Because on my podcast, I often say the two reasons why I do podcasts and YouTube and I created Meg is I want as many PT owners to live the ideal scene that they've always envisioned for themselves. And I want to help the profession of physical therapy as much as I can. Those are the only two reasons why I get up and out of bed and keep working. I've sold my practice twice. It's not a necessity for me to do that, but I'm so entrenched in it because I still want to pursue those two things. Back in 2003, when I needed help and I started looking for help, I was just taken back by this idea that I needed to go to this consultant group to teach me branding and marketing. I need to go to this consultant to teach me charging and coding. I needed to go to this consultant to teach me business spreadsheets, and everybody was in their own little pocket. And when you did that, once you started making changes in this area, it trickled down and had a negative effect or positive effect or some sort of effect on other areas of the practice, which I now created more problems for myself. And I realized then, I said to myself, I said, someday I'm going to bring this all together from janitor to CEO, from administrative division to quality control division to personnel division to production division to finance division to recruiting division. I'm going to take all five of these divisions. I'm going to sew them together so that the proper command channels are in, the proper communication lines are in. It took me a long time, like my whole career, flying all over the country, being in and out of 500 offices. But I finally successfully did it in 2018, and I made it virtual and I made it web-based, and it had to be live and engaging, and it had to have a file vault of all these templates. You can't go rewriting a policy and procedure manual from scratch. It's 300 pages, or a pay for performance model. We created the spreadsheets. We created the templates. So I finally achieved that. When you ask the question though, what about coaching? I think that was the biggest epiphany that I had, was back in the day when I was, my practice, one practice of the year, we shot up. groups hired me to be their consultant, and they would fly me into these different cities, and they'd book a Marriott, and they'd have 30, 40, 50 people in the room. And I'd talk for the 3 days, and they'd pay me $5,000 a day just for my plane to land and $5,000 a day to deliver. And I gave everybody everything I could, and I left, and I was on to the next city. Well, the funny thing about that is when I got to the next city, my attention was now on that group. I had no connection to the group I just left, whether they succeeded or failed. After a year of doing that, I asked my assistant to go back through the database and track all the people we've touched and what percentage were living the dream. What percentage took that information, that 3-day training, and actually achieved their ideals? It was 37%. It was 37. That means 1/3. Well, where's the other 2/3? They just spent a lot of money and they didn't get very far. That's when coaching hit me. It's coaching. It's coaching. When I played competitive soccer and I went to Europe, they gave me my own personal coach. And here's the thing with coaching, and I know you work with a lot of athletes, Garrett. Coaching, by definition, is someone who enables another to perform at a level that they otherwise would never achieve on their own. That's the definition of a coach. If I'm a good coach, it's because I'm able to get you to perform at a level that you never otherwise would have reached without my engaging you, without my coaching you. So teaching is dead. Consulting is dead. I am not a fan of any of that. Giving people bright ideas and hoping the best for them is just a waste of time and money. You need to align yourself. If like I always tell people, if not us, find another group, find someone who's going to be with you through the process of your evolution, through the process of your journey, to coach you over each hurdle, each obstacle, each barrier, each curveball that comes your way. Give you the knowledge, give you the data, give you the application. Like we have role plays, we have assignments, we have quizzes. All of that is very, very important because it's all two-way engagement. But you also have to be available as a coach to take that call, to take that email, to take that text and help role play live with them if needed on how to terminate that person who's making some wild accusation, or how to close that candidate who's trying to decide between your clinic and somebody else's clinic. What do you do and say, and how should you do and say it? Sometimes how you do and how you go about doing and saying things is far more important than what you're doing. And that's coaching. You got to hear it from another person. Anyways, it's kind of a long answer, but I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really big distinction, that coaching versus consulting, the guidance and accountability versus just giving the knowledge, or
Yeah.
done with you compared to done for you, or done, done, maybe something like that. But
Done
um,
with you, right? With
yeah,
you. Like I want to do it with you, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's really really good insights there. And I know we're coming up on the end of our time together here, so one more just rapid fire question here. So the only book recommendation I've gotten from you, I loved. It was The Go Giver. Are there any other books that you recommend to practice owners or in general?
Yeah. The Successful Millionaire by Dean Graziosi is one of my favorites. I've just recently completed that. I am in a book with, I'm on an Audible book right now with author Chet Holmes. Let me just pull up my Audible account
Is
here.
it The Ultimate Sales Machine?
It is The Ultimate
Oh
Sales.
yeah.
I want to make sure I said that right. I just love every page of that. Every minute I listen to is just a super, super great book. Um, um, there's another book called Cash Flow. Another good book. So those are three that I'm like very immersed in right now. I think they're very relevant to our current society and the future of what's coming. I will say this though, with everything that you see, block out all the bad and just stay uptone and stay upbeat about it, because people want to be around people like that. They want to be in environments where the future is what you're making of it. My strongest advice to anyone listening is your future is always what you make of it. Be more at cause and be less the effect. That's why I often say to people, ask yourself, you can do it now, Garrett. I do it all the time. I say to myself, if I take a snapshot of myself today and I take a snapshot of myself 5 years from now, how should those pictures be different? Or am I on a trajectory where a snapshot today and a snapshot 5 years from now is going to be the complete same? And so many staff therapists or clinical directors are like, yeah, if I don't change things, if I don't really open my own practice and get that SBA loan or do something, 5 years from now, it's going to look no different. I might be making $5,000 more, but that's not going to change my life. There is a certain sector of the population that is going to be very motivated by that, saying, yeah, I'm capable of more in my life. And if you are, and you're that person, then you owe it to yourself to live to your fullest.
Awesome. Awesome. I think that is excellent advice as well. One final question. How would you say, so you mentioned a little bit about your personal experience with the Neubie. People on here, most people on here have a device, listen to this. Some just have learned about us, may not have a device yet, but how would you say the Neubie has impacted the practices that you have coached that implemented it?
Well, it's impacted them two ways, and I'm glad that it's these two ways, and it's impacted their outcomes and their quality and brand. So I believe the outcomes, the quality builds the brand, right? So their brand recognition and the mental perception of who they are has changed because of the institution of the Neubie into their practice, because of the implementation of that advanced technology as seen through the outcomes and then in giving the higher quality and building their brand around it. And then the second is revenue. They become financially more stable, financially more secure. I had a PT practice owner come up to me at PPS a year ago, and she brought her P&L. And she showed me in 10 months on a cash basis side, she had collected over 100,000. I think it was 101, actually. It was $101,000 in revenue, cash services only using the Neubie in 10 months. In 10 months. Now, I don't know about you, but there's not many cash-based services you're going to put into your clinic, and within the first 10 months, you're going to clock $100,000 off of that machine. So I was blown away. That doesn't even count what she was making on the insurance side of it. So when you find something that's financially viable, and at the same time, it's the real deal. I mean, as we're doing this podcast right now, my wife, I mean, it's right here. It's right in the next room, right next to me here. The Neubie is right there. It's all set up. She tore her meniscus. She's having surgery on the 8th. But the only thing that has been helping her over the last couple of months, and I've tried to rehab her to 100%, but the MRI just shows this nice old big tear. But the only thing that gives her pain relief and enables her to function throughout the day and walk around, because we're moving and stuff, and she's got to be at the house and all that stuff, is the Neubie. She'll tell you, she'll just say, and she's a PT, of course, but she'll say, that's the only thing I can't get my knee all the way straight, but I can put the Neubie on and do a 25-minute session, and I can be pain-free for the rest of the day until the evening when it's bothersome again. And then she treats herself the next day. Every single day she's on that Neubie, and that's what's allowing her to hobble around until surgery. So I can just speak from experience there. Now, of course, I used it in my back before I had my back replacement, my disc replacement. And that's what gave me great results too. So she and I both have this personal experience with it. And then, of course, I've got hundreds of clients that are using it. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that you have been an advocate for the Neubie and really helped us get the word out in the physical therapy community. And, even more than that, just the knowledge that you share on your podcast and even just for free for people who haven't hired you as a coach or are formally working with Meg. But I can tell you, having gotten to peek behind the curtain and working with Meg at our practice, that I can tell everyone listening that the value there is tremendous. We've loved working with you. We've gotten a ton of value out of it, and I know many other practice owners who their work with you has either helped them get over a hurdle or has transformed their clinic. I mean, it's always been some variation of something incredibly positive, and you graciously have offered to not just for our listeners, but I think this is something that you do generally, but graciously offered to provide a practice assessment. Can you talk a little bit about what, if people are interested in learning more about you and Meg,
Yeah.
kind of what that looks like?
Definitely. So here's what we can offer. When people reach into Meg and they're like, okay, I'm not so sure if your services are right for me or not right for me. I have this kind of going on in my practice. I just need to bounce it off somebody and we need to talk it through. So that's what we call practice assessment. You go to my website, www.megbusiness.com, or you just email Jen, Jenn, at megbusiness.com. You can schedule yourself or she'll schedule you, and you'll have a 1 hour session or 1.5 hour session with me. We'll talk about all the divisions of your company, your personnel, your operations, and we'll talk about where you are at. Like, where do you really think you need to be? If you need some references, we'll give you some references. And then if you decide to move forward with Meg Academy, you can check it out on the website. We have a platinum package, a gold package, an a la carte package. We're going to find which is the right fit for you. Then you get started, and you're training at your own pace. I often tell people you only have to invest 2 hours a week and you're going to be really successful. We have the same thing for billing. We have a billing assessment. We'll rip through all of your billing. And I'll tell you, probably about 1/3 of the time when we do a billing assessment, we say, no, you don't have to switch your billing over to us. You're doing fine. There's just a few things on the edges you should correct and improve and do differently. And you're not in bad shape. You're not in bad hands. But then there's other things we look at and we're like, what is going on? Who's doing this billing? This is a nightmare. And then we'll flip them over. We'll take them on. And we do about 4, 5, 6 new clients every single month. We roll them into billing, and they can be on any software, any EMR that they want. From those assessments, people become clients. And I'm going to say this to your listeners as a special to your listeners. I will offer in their, let's say they do a practice assessment, and let's say they decide to move forward with our help, our coaching services. I'll throw in 1 hour of free coaching of my time coaching them specifically. It's usually a $500 service to have my undivided attention 1 hour, whether you need me to design a clinic or work out your pay for performance model with you or whatever the challenge may be. We'll just add that to your account, a $500 value to your listeners. It'll be a 1 hour coaching session with me for anyone who goes through the practice assessment and then ultimately decides to move forward and make a change in their life. I'll coach you myself. I'll put an hour in on that as well. Of course, after that, you have unlimited access to myself and all of our other team and our whole community through our Slack channels. And that doesn't cost you anything at all. So, and those are just 15-minute little coaching calls and sessions along the way or emails along the way. But this is an undivided 1 hour block time just for you.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. That's very generous. I really appreciate that on behalf of all of our listeners. And one other thing I'll mention that if you're interested in learning more about Brian's work and the type of content that they're covering, check out his podcast, Secrets of the Top 10%. It's on, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, right? All the usual channels.
It is. It is. And I really would love to help as many people as possible. That's what gets me out of bed. Garrett, thank you for having me on. I'm very fortunate and blessed that you thought of me to come and participate with you here. For all the listeners, both on my podcast and yours, I just love the idea that we're just so grooved into the same purpose of just trying to see people live a better life. Any way we can help you guys get there, call on either one of us. We're happy to help.
Amen. Thank you so much for joining us, Brian. Thanks everyone for tuning in to this episode of the Undercurrent podcast, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Thank you. Bye now.